Well, we've talked about the transfer portal all week. No reason to stop now, right? We might as well keep it rolling with transfer portal talk. But maybe we can find a different way to talk about, a different angle to take on the transfer portal conversation. I mean, like, literally, we had the Monday edition of the Morning Pitt, which was just about the spring game, right? And recapping the spring game and what we saw in the blue gold game and all of that. But then we had the Monday night live show. We had the Tuesday Morning Pitt, which again was about transfers. I was going to say, well, that was about basketball. That was still about transfers. We had a Tuesday night live show. We had yesterday's Morning Pitt. We had the live show last night. I lost count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Our last 5 shows have been about Pitt adding or losing players to or from the transfer portal. And so let's just keep it rolling. Let's make it number 6. We got a different approach today. We will try to take stock a little bit, do a little bit of a net, not just the gross departures or additions from the transfer portal, but how is the football program done in terms of net losses and additions? I mean, we could look at basketball. It's kind of easy, actually, on that side. Losing Will Jefferson, Federico, adding Cam Corrin and Damian Dunn. I think that's a net gain. But what about on the basketball side, or what about on the football side? It's a little more complicated, bigger numbers to talk about, bigger numbers to look at in terms of the scholarship players gone and the scholarship players returning. So let's check the net gains of where Pitt stands with the transfer portal here on April 18th. Are they ahead? Are they behind? Have they lost more than they gained, or have they gained more than they lost? Let's talk about it all right here on the Thursday edition of the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, it's Thursday. It's the Morning Pitt. It's youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. I feel like I've been talking to you guys a lot lately, except for like that 10 minutes or so on Tuesday night when I stopped talking to you. That was weird. Still think that was weird that happened. If you didn't check it out, I mean, it was one of those things that like you were either there for it or you were not there for it. And if you missed it, you'll never get to experience it because we deleted it. We trimmed it off the end of the video, added an extra 10 minutes to Tuesday night's live stream because the power went out about 55 minutes into the show. And so I just hung it up, said, oh, well, what are you going to do? Killed the internet, so I thought it killed the stream. And when the internet came back on, so did the stream, unbeknownst to me, as I sat there looking like this. Scrolling through, which was scintillating, I'm sure, for all those people who decided to stay on the stream and not just log off. But then we cut that 10 minutes off. I debated leaving it on there if people would want to watch it. It would be pretty weird. Just have 10 minutes of, occasionally my dog's barking in the background or something like that. But anyway, lots of transfer portal talk throughout this week. As players come and players go. Pitt made it through yesterday. I'm almost hesitant to say this because, I mean, obviously I'm taping this, through the day on Wednesday. And I know I'm taking a chance. I'm taking a risk recording this and saying there were no more, there was like a walk-on that went in, but, in terms of scholarship players, there might end up being a record scratch edit on this video where we say, actually, they ended up losing this guy and this guy and this guy. But let's look at what they've lost so far in the transfer portal. I thought we could kind of, we've got a transfer tracker on Panther-Lair.com on the message boards there, the Between Fifth and Forbes message board at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's pinned to the top there. We've been updating it. The 2024 transfer tracker, 3, 6, 9, 12. I'm just checking my math here. And it's a list. It's a list of all the guys who have gone into the transfer portal, where they ended up going, and it's a list of all the guys that Pitt has landed from the transfer portal and where they came from. Basically going back to last season. In the end of last season, I don't think they had any mid-year departures, but, like they had with Jaden Bradley that one year. I guess that would have been 2022. But it's just a rundown. It's a list of all the guys that have left Pitt for the portal, all the guys that have, come to Pitt from the portal. And I thought we could kind of just take stock of that, particularly in light of Deion Hayes and Solomon DeShields and Christian Bayer this week joining that list. When you add those 3 guys in, the numbers climb to 16. Pitt has had 16 scholarship players go into the transfer portal. They've actually only lost 14 of those, because 2 of those 16 who went in, Brandon George and Nate Temple, decided to return. But I'm leaving them on that list. If you go to the transfer tracker on the Between Fifth and Forbes message board at Panther-Lair.com right now, they're still on that list because they did go into the transfer portal. I guess technically I could also add them to the additions list because they came to Pitt from the transfer portal. They had that brief stint when they were in the portal for about 2 weeks each, or maybe it was even less, maybe like 10 days, and then they came back out. But Pitt has lost, I guess, technically 14 players to the transfer portal, 14 scholarship players, and they've landed 12. So you're at a -2 on the total numbers. But I thought what we could do today is sort of qualify those a little bit. Not just the numbers of 14 versus 12, but what they lost, the quality of players that they lost, who they lost, and which ones hurt the most and which ones, of the additions helped the most. A quick rundown of the guys that they've lost so far. I'll jog your memory on a few of these names. Aiden Henningham went to Albany State, which is actually in Georgia, not Albany, New York. Buddy Mack and Bengali Kamara and DeAndre Jules all went to South Carolina. Stephon Hall went to Youngstown State. Byron Floyd, the long snapper, went to Buffalo. Trey Anderson, the offensive lineman, not the Todd Graham quarterback, went to Utah State. Sam Okunlola went to Colorado, and Carter Johnson most recently transferred to Florida A&M. Wide receiver Addison Copeland and running back TJ Harvison, as far as I can tell, are still in the portal and haven't found a new home. I tried to double check on that. Not a lot of social media activity from either one of those guys. I should double check even on Copeland. I thought when I looked recently he had not found anywhere, but it may be, he may have found something. And then obviously Deion Hayes, Solomon DeShields, Christian Bear all went into the portal this week. None of them have decided on a destination yet. And as a brief aside on that, I think probably a lot of people assumed, particularly with Hayes and DeShields, and there's a contrast there, right, between Hayes, DeShields, and Veyer. Veyer's leaving because he's down the depth chart, right? He wants a better opportunity, wants a chance to play. DeShields and Hayes are leaving for other reasons, and we've talked a lot about this over the last couple of days, that it's not a matter of opportunity, because they had all the opportunity they could possibly want, I would think, at Pitt. But I lost my track. I was like, wait, where was I going with that? I think there's probably an assumption that Hayes and DeShields had destinations picked out before they even went into the portal. And I actually don't think that's the case. I've heard from a few people who have talked to those guys or been around those guys that they didn't have anything set up. It's not like they went into that's not to say they weren't getting tampered with. I'm sure they were. I would be shocked if that wasn't happening and hasn't been happening since December. But I don't think they have anything locked up and in mind that, I'm going to go here or we're going to go there. And I wouldn't be surprised if they end up going to the same place, although I'm sure each of those guys are looking for their own thing. There are some schools that I think are pushing very hard for them, and they may end up, schools that probably were in contact before they went into the portal, and they may end up at one of those schools. But I don't think they went into the portal with a destination set in mind. I think they really are seeing what they can get on the open market. And that's why, it's not like they turned around and committed right away. Caden Proctor, that offensive lineman who was at Alabama, transferred to Iowa, and then went into the portal pretty much as fast as he could this spring. Likewise, he's going to Alabama. It happened fast, and, some of these things are a little bit predetermined. I don't think that's the case with Hayes and DeShields. So that's what they've lost, the 14 players that have left Pitt for the transfer portal. The 12 guys they've added, Tamon Lynham, the cornerback from Nebraska, Nile Upa, the long snapper from Connecticut, Sincere Lee and Desmond Reed, the wide receiver and running back respectively from Western Carolina, Nate Matlack, the defensive end from Kansas State, Nick James, the defensive tackle from Indiana, David Ojebwe, the defensive end from Clemson, Lyndon Cooper, an offensive lineman from NC State, Jake Overman, a tight end from Oregon State, Key Thompson, the linebacker from Ohio, Raphael Williams, a wide receiver from San Diego State, previously of Western Carolina, and most recently Eli Holstein, the quarterback from Alabama. And I read through those names just to sort of set the table. I think it's important, that you sit there, that you do what I did when I sat down to start taping this show, that you just kind of look at the names. Like what jumps out first? Like what stands out to you? Like which list do you hear there and you say like, oh wow, either on the bad side with the transfers, the guys who left, or on the good side with the guys that are coming in. And I think I had my own reactions, but I wanted to kind of list it out a little bit more before I say, oh man, they've gained more than they lost, or they've lost more than they gained. Let's talk about starters. All right, so they had 14 guys that they've lost to the transfer portal. How many of them were projected starters? How many of them would you say, if they were on the roster in 2024, would be starters? Obviously, the two guys this week, Dayon Hayes and Solomon DeShields, are starters, and they would be starters. They would have started on this team in 2024. They started on this team in 2023, and they would retain those starting jobs for this coming season. I would say DeAndre Jules was a penciled-in starter at defensive tackle, and this is something I talked about earlier in the week, that he walked away from, I don't want to say a guaranteed role, but I mean, he was going to be a starter with, Devin Danielson and Tyler Bentley and David Green all gone. Jules was the oldest, most experienced, most veteran defensive tackle on this team, and was absolutely going to start every game they play as long as he's healthy, and probably get the most snaps out of any of the tackles. So he was a projected starter. That's 3. I think Sam Okunlola would have been a starter at defensive end. I don't think that, I feel pretty confident about that one. I think if everybody came back, it would be Dayon Hayes and Sam Okunlola as the starting defensive ends. And then I think, even though he's a bit of a divisive figure here, and it's hard for me to acknowledge that, but I think Bengali Kamara would have been back as a starting linebacker if he stayed with the team. I think he would be back in the starting lineup at probably star linebacker, and your starters would be, Kamara, Brandon George, and Solomon DeShields. Incidentally, 3 guys who all went into the transfer portal, even though George ultimately returned. So I think there's 5 starters out of that group, and that's it. Hayes, DeShields, Jules, Okunlola, and Kamara. The other 9 guys, it's Aiden Henningham and Buddy Mack and Stephon Hall and Byron. I guess Byron Floyd. Actually, you know what? I need to add Byron Floyd to my list because that's a starting long snapper. So 6 starters. The other 8, Henningham, Mack, Stephon Hall, Addison Copeland, Trey Anderson, TJ Harvison. Carter Johnson was going to play, but would not have been a starter. So you lose effectively 6 starters. And 8 backups or guys who would have been down the depth chart. But what about the guys they added out of the transfer portal? The 12 transfers who came in here. How many guys do you look at out of those 12 and say, those are starters? Now, I'm going to be honest, and granted, we're just coming out of spring camp. We don't really have a great sense of the depth chart right now of the 2 deep. But I'm going to be honest, I don't see 6 starters in this group. There's a possibility there could be 6 starters, but I'm not sure that I see it right now. I think Nate Matlack is a starter, although he's a starter because not because Hayes is gone, but because Okunlola left. Once, just one of those guys, Hayes or Okunlola left, they needed someone to step into a starting job, and I think Matlack's that guy. So I'll pencil him in as a starter. I'm not really sure there's anybody else that I'm penciling in right now. I think there's a few guys who are possibilities. Tamon Lynam, the cornerback from Nebraska, could be a starter at corner. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if your starters at corner are Rylan Gandy and Rashad Battle. That would be a perfectly, expected pair of starters. I could see those guys in that role. Key Thompson, the linebacker from Ohio, could end up starting at the money linebacker spot now that Solomon DeShields is gone, or it could be the backup middle linebacker, depending on what the coaches want to do at that money spot. If they want to move Thompson out there, if they wanted Braylon Lovelace to play out there. But again, Thompson's opportunity as a starter is, probably going to come because DeShields left. But let's not split those hairs too much. Sincere Lee and Raphael Williams, the 2 wide receivers who played in Cade Bell's offense in the past, potentially could be starters. I think if you return all of the rest of the wide receivers, and we have to add that caveat because we keep saying tomorrow's roster isn't promised to anyone, but if you return all of the remaining wide receivers on the roster, you would assume Kanate Mumfield and Kenny Johnson are 2 starters. So you're looking for really one other guy to be the main other starter, and it could be Lee or Williams. It could be Dejon Reynolds. I wouldn't be surprised if it was Lee or Williams. Neither one of those guys played in the spring game because they were both hurt, so we didn't really get a sense of how they'd be drafted or what their, how their teammates view them. But I think even then, you're probably at most looking at one of those guys starting, unless there are other defections from the wide receiver room. And then Lyndon Cooper, the offensive lineman from NC State, could find himself in the starting lineup. Some of that might depend on Ryan Jacoby's health and whether he's available and ready to play in August. If he's not, then Cooper could potentially be, your starting left guard, in addition to being the backup center, which is going to create, there's opportunities there if something happens with Terrence Moore. You don't want to count on that, but I mean, they've had to go to reserve centers like multiple times over the last few years. So you would think opportunities will present themselves. But my point is, I don't know if you have any surefire starters like Hayes, DeShields, Jules, Okunlola. Those four, at the very least, I would say were locked in starters on this defense for 2024 before they went into the transfer portal. I don't count four guys that they added from the transfer portal that will be locked in starters. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't think it's an either or like that. I don't know if you can automatically do sort of like a net gain, even though I said right from the start we were going to do like a net gain, net loss type of situation. I don't know if you can sit back and say, well, they're -3 on starters from the portal and losing to the portal. I think you want to add starters from the portal. Obviously, you want to get guys who are going to play a lot and contribute, but at the same time, you've got your full roster of players available who can step into those spots. And maybe you were counting on transfers to fill a starting job, and maybe you were counting on transfers to fill out the depth and compete for starting jobs and not necessarily be penciled in for it. So even though I just spent all that time listing all the starters gained and lost, I don't entirely know that makes it Pitt lost the portal. That said, they had a bunch of starters walk out the door. We'll see what happens with this group if guys like Lynham and Thompson and Lee and Williams and Cooper end up in the starting lineup in addition to Matlack, who I think will. But they had a lot of starters walk out the door. And it remains to be seen if the caliber of transfers they brought in, again, not entirely in a one-to-one exchange, but if the transfers they brought in end up being starter-level players. Now, the other thing to keep an eye on here as we move forward is, by our count, they are still over the scholarship limit. Excuse me. Bleh. Even with Christian Bayer and Dayon Hayes and Solomon DeShields coming off, going to the transfer portal, and Nate Temple coming off the scholarship board due to his season-ending injury, where I think they'll get him a medical exemption where he doesn't count against the 85-man scholarship limit. I think that still puts them at right around 89, which means they're going to need 4 guys to come off just to get just to get to 85, which is the limit for scholarship players, and they'll need more if they want to add additional transfers. As you look down the list, you say, well, how are they going to get 4 more transfers to leave? Some of it is transfers who would go. Some of it is they've got a handful of guys who were walk-ons and went on scholarship in the past. They could be potential candidates to come off of scholarship. I think that's always a possibility that you look at out there. I don't think it'll be hard. I don't think they'll have too much trouble getting 4 more scholarships, or maybe even 5 or 6 to open up. It wouldn't be a shock to me at all if they go into training camp in August with 83 scholarship players. Guys are going to go. Guys are going to look for other opportunities. And I think you can, if we sat down and made a 3-deep or 4-deep, if we put every scholarship player, all 90 or whatever they're at now, 89 guys, onto a depth chart, you're going to have scholarship players who are rounding out the 3rd team and the 4th team. And if they're, players who are in their 3rd or 4th year of eligibility, they're probably, they would probably be candidates to say, I think I'm going to move on. I'm going to look for another opportunity, either at a different school or a different level, whatever the case may be. And that's how a lot of, somebody like Vair said, I'm a redshirt junior, and I am now 3rd team. I was brought in explicitly or implicitly to be the starter in 2024 after Phil Dracovic was the starter in 2023. This was the whole plan last offseason, was Dracovic was going to come in and start for 23, and then I would step in and be the starter in 2024. Well, now I'm 3rd team. I think I can get a better opportunity elsewhere. And there will be other guys who make that decision 4 guys, 5 guys, 6 guys, 7 guys. It wouldn't be a surprise at all. And then you have that question of like the walk-ons of whether those guys stay on scholarship or not. So I don't think they'll have any problem getting to the numbers. I always sort of hesitate to speculate on guys who could go. But again, if we made that depth chart, if we put everybody on a depth chart, we could probably come up with a pretty solid guess at who might leave this team for the transfer portal this offseason, which scholarship players, which would open up those spots. So random collection of scholarship thoughts there, or transfer thoughts, I should say, on our Morning Pit here. Don't forget, tomorrow we've got our mailbag edition of the Morning Pit. You can submit your questions on the Between Fifth and Forbes message board at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Listen, like this video, and we're really coming up to that 4,000 subscriber mark. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I mean, this week has shown you what that is worth it, I think, because we've had a ton of videos, we've had live streams and all that kind of stuff, and you can be a part of it. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you won't miss any of it. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like this video and subscribe. We appreciate that for sure. And, of course, check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I appreciate it. I hope you've had a great week so far. We'll see what the transfer portal brings today and every day going forward. But enjoy your Thursday. Have a great one, and we will catch up with you tomorrow on the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.